All right, so hey everyone, happy Friday. Joined with Zooko. How's it going?
Hi, I'm good.
We're gonna,
It's been a hard week.
yeah, I definitely understand.
You can
Um,
hear thunder in the background and rain.
yeah, very dramatic, very apropos.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, we got a bunch of people watching. I'm gonna give it like a minute or two until there's people who until it's probably a good time to kind of officially launch. But yeah, so other than hard week, which we'll go into. You must have felt a certain bit of relief around the resolution of a few things, such as the spam issue, right?
Eh, my Zcash wallet has always worked for me. I kind of think the spam issue was sort of overrated. But I remember
Hmm.
you previously said something to the effect that your Zcash wallet didn't work for you during that period.
Yeah, yeah,
Like I
absolutely.
just bought this coffee with Zcash from Red
Hmm.
Rock's Coffee House in North
Nice.
Boulder. They don't even pay me to say this, but you should go to Red Rock's Coffee House in North Boulder and buy your
Well,
coffee with Zcash.
I can say the same thing, even though I've never been. But if I'm in town, I'm definitely gonna go because I was just at ETH in Amsterdam, and there's quite a few, private is a privacy focused ETH conference, and Ian, who used to work for ECC, was there, and the Railgun
Hmm.
people were there, which is very similar. So I kind of felt like I was with Zcash brethren and stuff, but I went out of my way to go to a merchant that accepted Bitcoin, just because I got to find someone in town, I got to do something, and so is this little Indonesian place, the Indonesian
Oh,
takeaway
cool.
place, and it was I used that actually in my talk the next a couple days later because they were super excited to see. So, oh, someone's paying in Bitcoin. This is great. They had this old QR code on the wall and a piece of paper, and a mycelium wallet on the phone. That was a legacy Bitcoin address. It wasn't even a SegWit. It was like from back in the day, and this is where the privacy thing comes in. It had this guy used a static address for the business over the past 8 years, and
Oh
so
boy.
I was able to tell the entire transaction history. And so, I mean, I didn't use it as a teaching moment about privacy in my talk, but I just said, look, I paid. The next person who paid before that was in August of last year,
Ah,
and then there was or there was October, and then there was a September and of that of 2022, and then the last one before that was 2020. It's
wow.
so like they didn't get a lot of it was like very sporadic actual usage, which is a little sad. But then also
Hmm.
I saw that they had like almost 1 Bitcoin in there or something,
Oh
and it's
wow.
just like okay, well that's decent over the years, but also like that could be if it becomes 2 or 3 Bitcoin. Now that could be a safety issue because the privacy, right? And so
Yeah.
kind of reminded me of why I do what I do with stuff like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I really appreciate something about the way you roll is
Mm-hmm.
really appreciate people learning from reality instead of from theory.
Mm-hmm.
You learn so much that way. And it's always like the theoreticians will always say, "Oh, we already knew that," but the empiricists correctly focus their attention on it instead of getting distracted by other things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I've kind of found that as like a very important. I'm sort of I'm wrapping my head around life the older I get. Stuff I'm trying to attack it from two angles, and don't
You
think
and me
you
both.
I don't think we get very far without planning really far out, and I also
Hmm.
don't think we get very far without testing our assumptions at the end. I guess the end points, and then
Hmm.
using that to kind of go back, like kind of approaching from both sides, both extremes. Like there's some cryptocurrencies that I like. I'm gonna maybe talk a little smack about. Let's just say Litecoin, right? Because Litecoin works pretty well today. It's one of the most useful cryptos today. But I don't know if I'd hold a lot of money in it long term because I don't know what the long term development plan is. What is there a scaling roadmap or like there's just a lot of like uncertainty that makes me not think it's just gives me a little bit uncertainty of where it's going. Whereas for example, something like Zcash, which has a lot of things really planned out, really figured out, even though obviously there's changes, but a lot of it makes me more comfortable even though there's fewer places I can use it today, kind of long term with something like that. But then at the end of the day, then you have to go try to spend it. And if something works and something doesn't, then you have to like reconcile that back to the beginning. So it's like the two points.
Yeah. Litecoin doesn't have like a funding model or like a sustainability model, right? For improvements.
It's basically, as far as I'm aware, it's a volunteer-based or maybe foundation donation-based, mostly backporting to Bitcoin. I think David Burkett, he might have done it solo. He implemented MWeb, the Mimblewimble extension block. And I think it was just his own initiative, and they just said, sure, we'll do it. But it could have just been no initiative and then no Mimblewimble. And that's where it's a little like, that's uncertain. But anyway, we probably rambled enough before the intro. We got a bunch of people here. Let me just hit the intro graphic, which of course I paid my designer in Zcash to do, of course. And yeah, let's get going. All right, so hey everyone, officially, happy Friday. This is the Zcash Podcast, which is funded by the community grant system, which I think is pretty cool because I've always wanted to kind of explore deeper into the world of Zcash. And someone put out a request for proposal of like a podcast. I'm like, hey, I do those things. Why don't I do it? And a bunch of people basically, as everything happens for me in Zcash, I kind of got bullied into it, where, friendly bullying of like, no, you have to do it. And just like, are you going to Zcon? I don't know. I haven't planned yet. Well, there's a scholarship. It expires in a few hours. You might want to apply. And then there you go. I guess I'm going to Zcon. So I'm joined by the one and only illustrious Zooko Wilcox. How's it going, man?
Thanks. Illustrious. That's a new one on me.
Yeah. Well, your legend precedes you, of course. And hold on a second. Things go great. All right. So just had a little message pop up. Also, I just see that Neil in the chat is posting the Odysee link too, because he doesn't like centralized alternatives and stuff like that, which I get it. Yes. This is in the link to the YouTube video, there's an Odysee link if you guys prefer to use that. And I
don't see any chats, by the way, but that's okay.
Yeah. Sorry, that was in a Signal group. On YouTube, there's a live chat with people are saying like, hey everyone, good afternoon, hey, and all that stuff. Nothing too substantive.
Hey everyone.
At the point. But anyway, if anyone is in my Discord, by the way, there's a Zcash Podcast superchat channel, which I will put those up on the screen with priority over the other comments. But since this is a big, community-wide kind of thing, I'll answer everything and anything. All right, so let's start off with, let's kind of get the ugly stuff out of the way first and transition to glory and hopefulness, hopefully by the end of this. You mentioned that this has been a little bit of a tough week. There was a restructuring at the Electric Coin Company, which is the main development company that does a lot of Zcash core protocol development. And yeah, why don't you just... I did listen to most of the Twitter space. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like it was recorded, but I did catch up about, after about 10 minutes in, I caught in. So you want to give a quick recap of what's going on there?
Yeah, so this week, the Electric Coin Company restructured. We laid off about half of our team, which is 13 people whose jobs we eliminated. And we committed to having a tighter focus where we're going to do fewer things. So that's sad. It's sad for the people who lost their jobs. It's sad for those of us who lost valued teammates. But it's also positive because now we have less distraction. We've eliminated a bunch of other things that we've been trying to do, and we're just going to do a few things, which I'm enthusiastic about. That's going to be kind of a relief.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, just an opinion, I'm not the authority on this, but I think it's going to be good for Zcash because it makes Zcash more decentralized. Because there's been a trend of a lot of different parts of Zcash relying on Electric Coin Company for stuff. in part because we created Zcash like almost 8 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just sort of got grandfathered in to supporting all kinds of different parts of what needs to be done. So I think it's going to be positive in the long run for that reason.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely for sure. One thing in open source ecosystems, I think it's really important to be able to have other things going on. Like I believe we mentioned earlier, I don't remember if it was during the live portion or not, but the Litecoin thing of where the Litecoin Foundation or anything didn't spearhead any extra privacy initiatives. It was one, as far as I know, one developer, maybe a couple, that decided to just, plug in with, Mimblewimble, get MWeb going there. And it's like that. I think that is one of the biggest value adds to Litecoin, both for a privacy standpoint. I mean, obviously we're not talking Zcash level, but like also from a scaling standpoint that just came from the community, right? Didn't come from the central organization. And so I definitely echo that. So would you mind quickly breaking down what did ECC do before and what is it going to do moving forward instead?
I would have to load up the full list on my phone, and I don't want to mess with it because it's currently running this Jitsi.
Just the highlights,
The first two that come to mind since I'm a technologist are maintenance of Zcash full node for all users and all use cases, and design review of all protocols that are proposed as upgrades to Zcash. That's something that the ECC team has always been really good at, both of those things. But it's one of those things that kind of consumes a lot more of your time than you'd think, especially because unlike Litecoin, Zcash has a lot of different things going on proposed by different people. And something else that we are winding down or transitioning, if we can find a willing partner who wants to help take it over, is global regulatory relations. People might not know, but Zcash is pretty unique in a way. I'd say it's unique in this way, that it's got the strongest theoretically possible privacy as enforced by zero-knowledge proof cryptography on chain. That's one thing. And then at the same time, it's integrated into all of the regulated USA crypto companies like Coinbase, Gemini, Kraken, and all the different crypto companies that do anything that are regulated by the government or different governments.
Kind of a beautiful paradox, like a beautiful juxtaposition.
I think it's fantastic that we managed to get into this position because of timing and because frankly that we set out to accomplish that from the beginning. That's why we launched Zcash 1.0 when it was so crappy. There's this rule that if your first product isn't crappy, then you waited too long. And so we scrambled and we succeeded at implementing zero-knowledge proofs and launching them in 2016 after only a year and a half, 2 years of development, which is really aggressive. And this is one way in which it's really worked out. So as a side effect, it kickstarted the entire zero-knowledge proof industry and technology. But as another effect, we managed to get all of the regulated U.S. companies and their government regulators to accept it back in the day, and so now it's still in that position. But I was trying to name other things that ECC used to do that we're now giving up in order to focus, in order to save costs. And one of those is global regulatory relations in all of the other countries. There's a lot of countries that have crypto users and crypto regulators and crypto companies. And it's potentially really important because, crypto is almost more useful for, Turkish people and Lebanese and so on and so forth. But we can't afford the money and the spreading ourselves too thin to keep doing that. So if anyone else in the Zcash community wants to become the point person for engaging with regulators and exchanges in all different countries, here's an opportunity. There's a lot more marketing, basically. We've really cut back on PR and marketing and raising awareness of Zcash. That's something that we have been trying to do for a long time. And frankly, we hadn't been that successful, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
Zcash is really well known and really well regarded in a very small circle of like crypto OGs or crypto experts.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that hopefully someone else will figure out how to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been kind of interesting to see grow because I have been obviously a fan of privacy from very early on, from ever since I realized that you could trace crypto transactions. That was one of my first things I really liked about Bitcoin was the fact that it was pseudonymous, that it
Yeah.
wasn't tied to your identity. But then I realized that there's more. And then since like the
Yeah.
early days, all the privacy coins, as they're called, I kind of had a lot of interest in. Watched Zcash kind of from a distance for a while, and used it. And I do remember some people. First of all, I remember people using, again, we're talking about the few, using shielded transactions to buy something in person at a shop via command line, right? Doing the CLI on a laptop generating thing, like what you're talking about, like the crappy
That was
product.
the crappy version 1, yeah.
Yeah, way in the early days, but it was still, it was still cool, it was still fun.
No, I'm really glad we did that because we wanted to, sorry to interrupt,
Yeah,
but
no problem.
we wanted to implement that kind of privacy, like the really strong kind of privacy. Like I'm biased, but basically anything less than that is not really going to work. Like
Mm-hmm.
AIs and governments can see right through all the weak ass privacy,
Mm-hmm.
but they can't see through like the really cryptographic strength privacy. So we really wanted to get that implemented and deployed before sort of governments found out about crypto and
Mm-hmm.
and privacy and all that.
Yeah,
And we succeeded at that.
it's kind of funny. It's interesting to see kind of the transition because I've also been transacted with some people. I believe like 2016, 2017, maybe around that time, 2018, maybe at some conferences that were like, oh, you know, there was a merchant that took crypto but not Zcash, and so they wanted to pay me with Zcash, and I paid the thing for them with a different crypto,
Oh, cool.
and it was cool. But they sent me, of course, transparent Zcash. But the thing is, they didn't know it was. They thought it was private, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
listen, like, it's great. Probably no one knows what you're doing, but I'm just like, there's a lot of education needs to happen until then. But yeah,
Yeah.
it is kind of interesting because I've watched from that whole era of like the Founders Reward era, and then we hit the next era, right, where it wasn't just the Founders Reward anymore. It ended up being the decentralization
fund.
era. Yes, it turned out into some for the ECC and then some for the foundation and the grants committees and all that kind of stuff. And that's where I started to get more of my interest peaked, because I wasn't just like, this is great technology that a company's building. It's just like, this is great technology that a company's building that other people are doing things on too. And
Yeah.
so, yeah,
Yeah, I think that was super positive when the community came up with the dev fund. They we I personally and my company, Electric Coin
Mhm.
Company, pretty much refrained from like advising or requesting how they ought to structure that,
Mhm.
and by their own methods. And there was a bunch of polling and debate and whatever, and they came up with giving ECC a third of the dev fund and 2/3 to other organizations. Um,
Yeah.
okay, so I do wish we had more money, especially this week, but I
Of
think it's
course.
really positive for the reason you gave, which is that it helps demonstrate to other people that it's actually decentralized, and so it's more worthy of their interest, their
Mhm.
time. And I feel
Yeah.
the same way about this thing right now, where ECC is further like narrowing our scope, and all those other organizations are doing more.
Mhm.
And this is about to happen again, where the dev fund sunsets itself at the end of 2024. Right?
Mhm.
It was a 4-year thing when the community instituted it at the end of 2020.
Mhm.
And so they've now started another round of this public debate. So
Yeah.
however it comes out, I have a really strong opinion that a dev fund like that is a huge strategic advantage. Like you were saying, that Litecoin is just dependent on a volunteer hacker to show up
Yeah.
or not.
Well,
So I think dev funds are awesome, but however it turns out, it's going to be really positive because it's going to
mhm,
hopefully people are going to notice that this is Zcash being decentralized and sort of uncontrollable.
mhm. Which I think is a kind of a good thing, and it'll be more so moving forward. Um, I was at ETH Dam in Amsterdam over the last weekend, and Justin Bonds of Cyber Capital has gave an interesting talk, but he'd also kind of recapped it via Twitter thread earlier about he is very disappointed in the lack of scaling that's happened on chain for Bitcoin. But now
Mm-hmm.
in Ethereum, that Ethereum appears to have removed execution sharding from the roadmap, and he
Mm.
sees this as a corrupting influence of all the money that's in L2s compared to the
Mm.
money that's in L1s. And
Yeah.
so it kind of brings back, and so his solution is layer one on chain governance and development funding right from the block reward, basically.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's kind of funny how like it's one of those things which obviously I've been kind of this mindset for a very long time because I started getting more involved in the Dash community in 2016 and then obviously now Zcash, and like that's kind of been my perspective of like development funding from the block reward the entire time through. And it's kind of interesting to see where this has led us, to this point.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. The source of your funding is what you should be really thoughtful about. Like I
Hmm.
learned this with Linux. I used to be really active in open source free software. Um, I was one of those people who, since I feel like dumb now in retrospect, but I sincerely thought we can take this open source Linux thing, we're all in it together, and we can make it better than Windows, better than Macintosh, and free everyone from like Bill Gates and whoever,
Hmm.
Apple, controlling what they can do
Yeah, of
all the
course.
time. And then what I saw was who was funding those Linux developers. And it was Samsung and Intel and Qualcomm and IBM and so
Hmm.
forth. And so then what inevitably happened? Well, Linux got really, really good at, serving the needs of Intel and Qualcomm and Samsung, but it never competed with Windows.
Mm. Yeah,
So
that.
my point is, whatever the source of the money is, that's going to have an influence. Money never comes without some kind of influence attached. And so that's why I agree with what you were saying that Justin Bond said. Um, and that's what I love about the Zcash Dev Fund is that it's sustainable and it's
Hmm.
capture resistant,
Yeah.
right? If you're relying on some philanthropist or government or billionaire or someone to fund your thing, then
Hmm.
you're going to be vulnerable to your thing getting turned toward their purposes.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I, preaching to the choir here on that for that. That's for sure. So you've been with ECC for quite a few years. What's kind of your big picture like observation of the way things have gone since like the founding to today? What's kind of a good recap of like where we went from there to here with ECC?
Um, so the negative part is the price of ZEC keeps going down. That's like the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
And like hypothetically, or not, that's the wrong word, but like idealistically, I and everyone at ECC and pretty much every Zcacher that I ever talked to, which is a lot of people, are like mission driven, not money driven, right? We're
Yeah.
patriots, not mercenaries. But it's a dead fact that the price going down year after year is a huge drag on everyone's emotions and their abilities, their capacity to do
Hmm.
stuff, such as ECC itself is just experiencing. Um, so that's kind of one of the major factors that I don't want to skip naming it over my past like 6 to 8 years of my experience because it's really impactful. The other one I would say is that well, I want to say a second negative one, and then I'll go on to the
Okay.
positive ones. The negative one is, and this is, I'm like a computer scientist and a cryptographer and a coder originally, and I just got into the CEO role by accident by wanting to do everything my way and getting other people to do it with me. But my approach or my training or whatever is very technical. I'm really perplexed by narrative, the way narratives work. And so my other big picture, it's totally negative, but I would say Zcash has somehow been subject to negative narratives very effectively, and different negative narratives, different years. But there's always another negative narrative about how Zcash is doomed, or it's corrupted, or it's useless, or whatever, which were never true. And it always perplexed me that, like, I thought that false things would eventually get disproven and people would stop saying them, but they don't. They keep saying them. And then the positive side, from my perspective as a technologist, is Zcash and ECC, my team in particular, has advanced the state of the art of cryptography 3 different times in whatever 6 years.
Yeah.
And I'm so proud of that. Like,
absolutely.
Even one time would have been like a satisfying feather in my cap when I'm on my deathbed or whatever. It's not my doing. It's the team that I mainly get credit for attracting such awesome people and keeping them together. But this team, they brought zero knowledge proofs into reality at all in the first place. If they hadn't, I don't know if any zero knowledge proofs would be deployed yet today. There'd probably still be people like working on it, because it takes years and years to do that kind of thing.
Of course.
And then you were saying in 2017 or 2018 or something, you were messing with it. In 2018, this same team developed what we call Sapling, which is like Zcash 2.0, which was the first time that zero knowledge proofs worked on a smartphone.
Yeah, that's when I started to pay attention, really. I'm like, oh,
yeah, because
I didn't
you
think
no
this
longer
was
had
possible.
to get out your laptop in the command line
Yeah.
to use it with Sapling. And that was like another tour de force. Like, as a technologist, I swear, sometimes, multiple times, like at least 3 times that I can think of, maybe 4 times just off the top of my head, some like cryptographer has come up to me and said, oh, wow, the Sapling protocol is one of the most beautiful things that I've ever read. Like, the cryptographers are seriously, they really admire it. And I really admire it as a technologist. It's a fantastic, like, technological invention. It makes it so you can have shielded transactions on smartphones. And then Sapling got cloned into, because we open sourced it, of course. I think like 90 or 100% of all of the serious privacy and or scalability projects out there today use some or all of the Sapling technology. Like you mentioned Tornado Cash before we started. Like, there may be a couple of exceptions. Like, honestly, not to tangent, but I don't consider Mimblewimble to be real privacy. Sorry, that's weak. That's weak sauce. That's not going to slow down an AI for shit. But anyway, Sapling was fantastic. Breakthrough in 2018, made it possible to run on phones. And then last year, the same team, for the 3rd time in a row, changed history with Zcash Halo, which is the first, I'm going to call it verifiable. There's this word trustless that people use. It's a very confusing word, and I think it sounds really negative to normal people. Like, is that bad? Is it bad, or what? But a better word than trustless is verifiable, which is nowadays, as of right now, like last time you sent or received Zcash to your phone, Joel, there's a zero knowledge proof that it's a zero knowledge proof that you've correctly received a real, Zcash, right? That's not counterfeited or double spent or whatever. And for the first time, thanks to the ECC team's breakthrough, Halo, you can verify that, or your phone is verifying the math for you, and the math itself is sufficient to prove that correctness of the proof. Namely, there's no trusted setup. That's the first time that was possible in a phone. Whereas and honestly, the rest of the industry is currently a step behind. They cloned Sapling or different parts of, or whatever. They've largely reused or built on the work of Zcash 2.0, and they've also invented a lot of other really great stuff on their own. But most of those projects are still using trusted setup, probably because they got started like a year or 2 or 3 ago before we had deployed Halo.
Of
or else
course.
they don't realize how trusted setup really undermines the point of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was trying to persuade some
Mm-hmm.
Ethereum people of this at one point, and I said, if there's a 20, like the year is 2050,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so whatever, quarter century from now, and there's like a 25-year-old person who wants to decide what they rely on for
Yeah.
their life, their assets, and their social life, and their career, and whatever they're doing. And you show them something, and they say, "How do I know I can trust this?" And you tell them, "Well, back in like the year 2020, some people did this process." That's not verifiable,
Yeah,
right?
of
History
course.
is not verifiable, but math is verifiable. All right, totally tangential rant, but my point is,
Yes.
you asked, what's the big picture about Zcash? And to my mind, as a technologist, it was Zcash 1.0, Sapling, and then Halo.
Yeah. So the base technology has gone through a few kind of heroic innovation leaps over the last few years.
Yeah, and I think Halo is good enough. Like you get to a level where further improvements aren't really going to change things.
Mm-hmm.
With Halo, it's mathematically verifiable, and Halo is recursive, which means you can use it to prove arbitrarily complicated statements or verify
Mm-hmm.
arbitrarily complicated statements. So it means it's really uh, flexible for all kinds
Yeah.
of uses. So I don't think we need to invent another generation of zero knowledge proofs for our purposes in the near future.
Yeah. So, what's your take on the state of Zcash today? We went through all that kind of stuff. It seems like there's been some heroic improvements into the actual privacy protocol and how it works and
Yeah.
all that. And then where do you take Zcash as a whole? The whole project is where it stands today. What's a good overview of where you think we are
That's a good
today?
question. Yeah. So at a technology level, I think it's really, really solid. At a user experience level, you and I disagree on this. I think it's
Mm.
been pretty reasonable UX. Like I say, I've been buying my coffee with Zcash every day
Mm-hmm.
for like years. Um, and I tip the baristas too. So first I
Yeah.
send some Zec to the coffee shop for the coffee, and then I send a little tiny fraction of Zec to each barista for having made
Mm-hmm.
my coffee. So from my personal experience, the UX, if you have a mobile wallet, is okay already. Um, the price of Zec going down over like mostly down most years for several years, I think
Mm-hmm.
is a huge factor. And one that I can't explain. Like, I don't know
Hmm.
why prices do what they do,
Do you have
either Zec
theories?
or Bitcoin
Because
or anything.
we could have theories, even though it's hard to verifiably prove some things like that.
I don't really know. I like to admit my ignorance when I don't know things.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't know. And also same for Bitcoin and everything. Like everyone always has theories about why markets choose the prices they do,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't.
Yeah.
But even not knowing the cause, it's a really important effect, right? Like if
Mm-hmm.
we're evaluating where we've been, where we are, that's a major factor affecting everything today.
Yeah. Well, that's for sure. And just on like the usability kind of front, I started using Zcash shielded things more frequently like a year ago maybe, and things worked out really well. It was like right around before when and then when you visited and during and after, like all that time.
Mm-hmm.
And uh I have a new phone right now. I mean, this is a Pixel 6a, right? Because I decided to go the
Mm-hmm.
whole de-Googled route. But before that,
Nice.
I have another phone, and things worked great. When the congestion issues started to happen, I was unable to fully sync any phone, any wallet on that old. It was a
Mm-hmm.
2018 OnePlus 6, right? Which is an
Mm-hmm.
older phone, right?
Yeah.
It's not a new phone. It's an older phone, but it worked fine. It works for all the other cryptos. And then
Mm-hmm.
I had to like leave it on all night to sync, and it wasn't completely done syncing in the morning.
Yep.
And now the state where we're at with this phone, if I don't use it for a week, I open the wallet, and within 30 seconds I got a full sync. And
Nice.
so that's not bad. It's also not
Yeah.
like it's also not like you go out to pay and you have to wait 30 seconds. it's more like you want to open it before you have to go pay. And if you're using it
Yeah.
every day, it's fine. But it's kind of interesting how like the user experience thing is extremely personal. And for like some people, like you mentioned, there's a lot of people in like Latin America and other maybe developing parts of the world. And to onboard a new user who has to keep their phone going under weird conditions with connectivity for a whole day or two just to start using Zcash, that's where it becomes like a problem. And so that's where I hope that like today, as of at the Zcash meetup local to me, they had showed like the chart of like the transaction, the data and stuff, and it's like, yay, it's over, and you know, everything seemed to work pretty well. So now we're at a spot where I think stuff is on the mend. I don't think it's ever really going to be perfect, but also, you know, stuff kind of gets fixed over time.
Yeah.
And yeah. So as far as like the state, I do think honestly, this is just speculation on my part, right? Because no one knows, but I do think there might have been some kind of a price correlation with the difficulty using for a certain period of time for certain people. And
that makes sense.
A lot of times people might speculate. It's like, oh, if it's not working, then this is not a good sign for it working in the future, kind of thing. And it's just a very primitive thing. And I found
that's a really good way to think, actually, in my view.
Yeah, I found it intellectually very challenging to develop primitive yet useful ways of thinking. You know, as far as like, why is this value and this isn't. And I'm sure when you mentioned about the narrative battle over the years, that probably is played a part too, if I were to guess. And just another thing is just the general, this is a frustratingly, at least to me, it's frustrating for now. It's a frustratingly speculative space where you have like Pepe coin going to the moon and all this stuff, and people are pumping Doge not because any actual promise of use happened, but because of now there might be a chance that someone else buys it, and just all this like stuff. Yeah. And so I just think that like Zcash, I mean, do you remember the price of the first ever Zcash sold? It was like very high, right? It was like
I remember.
It was over a Bitcoin's price. It was several Bitcoin's value, actually.
Oh yeah. That was a naive mistake on my part not to think about market structure, because Zcash started. We just emulated Bitcoin's like launch process, right? So it started with 0 coins in existence, and then the first miner got like a tiny fraction of a coin. Yeah. And it didn't occur to me that the first miner would post that tiny fraction of a coin to the highest bidder, that someone would bid like, I don't know, multiple Bitcoins or 1,000 Bitcoins or something for the first 10th of a Zcash.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Zero Dart in the live chat, by the way, he said 7 BTC was the price. And so, like, if you compare Zcash the way it is today as a product and technology with back in the day, it's obviously, compared to today, it was ridiculously overpriced at the beginning. And that wasn't because of utility. Of course, it's speculation. People are like, this is awesome. What if this goes to the moon? I'm going to buy some, like, I'm going to spend 7 Bitcoin on a single Zec so I can be rich in the future. It is the way things go. We did have a question in the Odysee live chat from Boston Zcash. He's just said,
hey, Boston Zcash.
He says, hey there, not a softball question for the wearer of wizard hats. Sorry. Why did it take as long as it did for the ECC to enter emergency mode with regard to the sandblasting attack? He says, I'm surely glad for ZIP 317 release, which appears to have had an immediate impact, but from the time it began last June until now, the experience was so degraded that real-life acceptance of ZEC amongst our circles was in retrograde. I feel like a sense of urgency wasn't felt and user feedback was ignored, whereas I'd expect a company whose product encountered such a poor user experience would have acted much more swiftly to ameliorate it in fewer than 11 months. So, and that of course goes back to the user experience is personal kind of a thing, where my new phone user experience, even before this was fixed, was not too bad, but my old phone one was. But your experience syncing the wallet every day for coffee with a probably decent phone wasn't. Yeah. But anyway, so.
No, I mean, that's not why. it's basically just underperformance on our part
Mm-hmm.
is the real answer. We didn't publicly describe it. Underperformance on like time efficiency of shipping
Mm-hmm.
fixes for sure. Also, apparently, based on your question, underperformance about communication
Mm-hmm.
effectively, like communicating clearly, because we actually internally declared that it was an emergency and that we needed to fix this above all else way back, like maybe July, I forget exactly, but maybe August, but like pretty early in that process when we realized
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't like no one else was going to fix it and it wasn't fixing itself. But we didn't communicate that to the community effectively, as shown by Boston Zcash's question. But
Mm-hmm.
moreover, like almost more equally importantly, we just didn't execute effectively. We spent
Mm-hmm.
most of a year just struggling to do the necessary upgrades.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to be fair, we did ship Zcash D upgrades pretty quickly. You can look back at the timeline, but within a month or two of us internally declaring it as emergency mode, we had shipped a version of Zcash D that restored service to like the CEXs and the full nodes that depend on Zcash D. And then another month or two, we had shipped another major upgrade to Zcash D that further fixed the problems that the high load was causing for those users. But then we didn't ship anything that helped the mobile wallet users for a long time. And that's just a failure of execution on our part. And that's one of the reasons why I'm hopeful about what the new narrower focus of ECC. Now we have fewer people to talk to and coordinate in
Mm-hmm.
our internal team chats, and we have fewer responsibilities. So everyone knows everyone inside ECC knows there's a bunch of things that we're not going to get distracted trying to help other people or support other use cases. We're just going to focus on these ones. And so
Mm-hmm.
hopefully we'll be more efficient at this kind of thing going forward.
Yeah. So it's kind of like a little bit of a wake up call on the efficiency and mission focus kind of part, right?
Absolutely. We had previously said something to the effect that, oh, if we did get a load increase, we can see how we can imagine how we could change different parts of the system to accommodate higher load,
Mm-hmm.
not infinitely, but 2x, maybe 5x amount of users or usage or whatever. And since we could imagine it, we said, oh, well, we could do that relatively quickly. So we don't have to do it proactively. We can wait till we know we need to do it, and then we could probably crank that out. And that turned out to be totally wrong. It was true for Zcash D, but it was totally wrong for the mobile users in this experience. So we've learned a lesson.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So now that thing's behind us, let's talk about this newest discussion on the up. Yes.
Tiny point of clarification. I'm happy to move on
Absolutely.
in the conversation,
Yes.
but for ECC, at least, emergency mode is not over. Even though we have this ZIP 317, which increases the price you pay or the fees you pay
Mm-hmm.
for more transactions on the blockchain, and that has apparently changed the usage pattern.
Mm-hmm.
But there are three Zcash shielded wallets that all three rely on ECC's mobile wallet SDK.
Mm-hmm.
That's Unstoppable, Edge, and Nighthawk, which were three good wallets before the high load arrived and broke them. And ECC is still in emergency mode until the users of those wallets have access to their funds and can send and receive ZEC easily.
Yeah. So the ECC SDK has to be fixed, or there has to be a different one that is used by these wallets.
Yeah, we're shipping upgrades to our SDK, and then we're asking those three partners, Nighthawk, Edge, and Unstoppable, to integrate our fixed SDK and deploy it to their users as soon as possible. So from our perspective, we're still in emergency mode. So that's also one reason why we'll be less responsive if you talk to us about anything else for
Yeah.
the next few weeks.
Well, I have some, obviously, you have good connections with Nighthawk, and I have very good connections with Edge, and you probably do too. So it probably wouldn't help for me to say
partners.
anything, but Twitter DM Paul,
Wouldn't
and
hurt.
he,
Yeah.
gets it done really quick.
Encourage
So.
him.
Yeah, and so let's talk about this like dev fund thing, right? Because originally the founders reward was created, which was it was kind of had a lot of positive and a lot of controversy and whatever else, but it was a fixed timeline. After the fixed timeline, then we ended up coming up to this. Hey, guess what? We have an expiration date coming up. Well, what do we do from here? And then there was discussion, all this kind of stuff, and then the current dev fund setup split kind of was created, and now here we are again in a certain extent, and now I think that this is to a certain extent a lot of bigger decision than the last time, baby, but also an easier decision to make because before it's like you've already moved forward once, you've already done it once, you can do it again. But so you might give me a quick rundown of like where we're at with this next decision, this next like governance decision.
Happy to, but I'm not really the expert. Like ECC and me personally haven't weighed in or advocated for anything, except like I said earlier in this podcast, I think Dev Fund is awesome because it's sustainable and decentralized. And so I think that's a huge advantage that Zcash currently has over most or all competitors. But there's been a big conversation on the forum, the Zcash Foundation's forum. There was a poll that was started by Jason McGee from the Zcash Community Grants Committee. And then there's a big old thread. The thread is really sour. I don't read all of it. There's a lot of discourse which seems negative to me, but moreover, it seems unrepresentative of the Zcashers. There's this weird pattern I have where I don't know if it's my filter bubble or someone else or the forum's filter bubble or both, but I get really heartfelt messages of support like on the daily from people who like most of the time, like a third or 2/3 of the time, I've never even heard of them before, and they send me direct messages or approach me at conferences whenever I'm out and about or whatever, and they say things like, Zcash is my values. Zcash is like the defender of my values. They say like, I have children and I don't want them to grow up in an Orwellian world, and that's why I support Zcash. Like, they're very heartfelt. They claim pretty much always to be like long-term ZEC holders. They tell me they've been holding ZEC since the beginning. They tell me stories about their first penny rig and whatever. But like, I lost count. One time a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to my team inside ECC, and I wanted to relay this encouragement to them because the forum thread on the Zcash Foundation's forum, it's a shit show. There's like 6 trolls or 4, I can't count, 4 or 6 trolls, right? Or 3, somewhere in that. And they dominate the discussion, right? Like they make sure one of them is the reply to every other person's reply, which means anybody who reads the thread is seeing just like the ongoing shit show, And so I wanted to show my team inside ECC, like, if you look at that, don't feel like the community doesn't see you or doesn't care about you or doesn't care about Zcash or doesn't care about freedom. That's just like those 4 to 6 people on the forum. So I looked in my inbox, in my Twitter DMs, okay? And I scrolled back like 3.5 days until I had made screenshots from 9 different people, I think half or 2/3 of whom I hadn't heard of before, whatever. And they're like, all these screenshots are saying this, like freedom and privacy and personal sovereignty are the most important things to me, and I see Zcash as the most important standard bearer or the point of the spear or the battlefront or whatever. So what was my point? My point is, you asked about the dev fund discussion.
Yeah.
My answer is, I'm not directly involved in it. there's a very big discussion on the forum. However, in my view, that discussion is not really representative of the Zcashers. There's like
Mm-hmm.
6 good Zcashers and 4 to 6 trolls, and that's like 99% of all the people that really have strong feelings and strong thoughts and Zec holdings, and they use Zec every day and all that. They're not represented in that conversation. So I don't know what that means though. Where, like, where are they represented? I don't know.
Yeah. As far that's one of those, because crypto is both open, like an open participation system in general,
Yeah.
and because it's anonymous or pseudonymous, right? It's not a KYC system, let's just say.
Yeah.
Because of that, there's a lot of a community Sybil attacks going on. I've noticed this, and this is like I've
Yeah.
been in the community, in the crypto community in general, for a good 10 years now, right? I've seen a lot of stuff. Obviously not as long as you've been in there, but still, it's been a while.
Close.
And I, like, for example, with the block size war, there was a lot of, we saw with the, I mean, there's a million different opinions on this, but I'm just going to give you my perspective, what I saw. It appeared to be that all the major, or most of the major economic actors favored a block size increase. And when you got the New York agreement, which, you know, might have been poorly executed or whatever, but it's still, you could see that the hash rate support also seemed to lock in with that. And it was the nodes and the people, supposedly, who didn't like that. And it seemed to be an easily spoofable metric, which won out in the end, is in who can run a node. Anyone can run a node and run the thing. It's not that hard to run a Bitcoin node, especially not back in the day. And then anyone can create a Twitter account. And then we start to see evidence of a dragon's den of explicit, like a Slack channel of explicit internet trolls meant to throw off this kind of conversation. It's so I've seen that in a million different ways. I've moderated community forums, but especially crypto community forums, for almost the entire time, like 9 years and stuff, like Discords and stuff. I've seen people take over things. It's very, here's a couple things. Well, first of all, free speech has to happen, right? Unfortunately, there's some negatives with free speech, but it's like a requirement. It's just like, well, a side effect of life is pain, but life, we need life, right? I mean, we can't get rid of that. So, I've also noticed that trolls they can really derail conversations in some really interesting ways, and kind of spoof things. I noticed a little bit of that in the Zcash Telegram group. There's a couple people there who I see constant offenders. And I believe in most community forums, there should be some manner of moderation. And I don't really know how you achieve that without stifling discussion. That's always a little bit of a challenge. But the other thing is a proof of something is always good. And in a DAO, for example, you tend to have proof of tokens, proof of voting. You have a DAO vote. And I've seen this happen many times where with a DAO vote, you'll have a lot of the community saying this, and you get an impression that everyone's thinking about this, that everyone thinks this. And then when it comes down to the votes, it's the opposite. It's like, it's revealing. And, so that kind of brings to the question in all this thing about the governance process itself is, who should decide what happens, and how do we determine who is who?
Yeah, those are good questions. And you have more exposure to more different crypto projects. So like your perspectives on DAO votes coming out the opposite of what the discussion showed is an interesting one.
Yeah. So when we talk about the community, like this is already, almost 3 years ago, right? This already happened. So who in your estimation decided on the dev fund setup that happened over the last few years? And what were the metrics they used to determine that?
That's a good question. It's such a complicated answer.
Of
And I
course.
think,
That's
like,
why we're here to ask the hard
so
questions,
complicated. Like, I think the real answer in everything in crypto, like, I think the reason why all decentralized cryptocurrencies like
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Zcash are consensual and opt in
Mm-hmm.
is because users can always chain fork.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if some users disagree with other users, they both get what they want about the
Mm-hmm.
rules. That happened with Zcash. It's happened with Bitcoin. It's happened with Ethereum. And it's happened with Zcash, where different factions disagreed, and so both sides got a branch of the blockchain with their preferred rules in it.
Mm-hmm.
In Zcash's case, it was during the DevFund debate. A faction of Zcashers opposed the creation of a dev fund, and so they created Ycash. It's called.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like my main answer. I think that's really important. Like, I feel like any how do I put this? What really matters to me, what
Mm-hmm.
really makes something legitimate to me, is that there would be a massive users who opt into it, who
Mm-hmm.
choose it consensually. Like, consent is
Pretty big.
my touchstone, right? Like, that's the one of the most important factors in things to me. And then any decision process that's sort of is layered on top of that, or goes first. Like, you can imagine, okay, we're going to have a chain fork. There's going to be both versions, like Ycash and Zcash. And then we want to have like communication with each other to figure out uh, how many of us would choose which,
Mm-hmm.
or what specific settings would be most acceptable to the largest number of people, or whatever. And to me, that kind of like community governance process is legitimate only in as much as I can plausibly believe that the users would have opted into that if there was a chain fork. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying?
Yeah,
So
of
I'm
course.
very leery of any governance process where I could say to myself, well, sure, they went through this process. There was a vote or a DAO coin count
Mm-hmm.
or a forum thread or whatever it is, or like you say, node signaling, minor signaling, even
Mm-hmm.
anything. All of that, I would, if I say to myself, well, yeah, they've definitely got a majority of that, but it still seems plausible to me that the majority of the actual users, or the economic majority of the actual users, would have opted into the opposite, then that makes me
Gives pause.
leery of whether it's legit. So unfortunately, I don't know if this is my sincere belief, but I don't know how useful it is, because
Mm-hmm.
it seems a little bit impractical to just have a chain fork every
Of
time
course.
everyone disagrees on anything.
The
But
big
that would be my
the
ideal,
time
right?
honored Bitcoin
Basically,
Cash way, right?
yeah. But just make it cheaper and lighter weight.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't take 2 or 3 years wrangling over it and get all angry about it. Just make it like a push button process. You can have chain fork every
Mm-hmm.
day. That's my ideal. But then other things that approach that ideal, or what, to try to answer your question after all that rambling, you said, how did the dev fund get decided? And it was a combination of multiple things, which fortunately kind of lined up. Like, there was
Mm.
this really good conversation with, it was started by Mind Zcash, who was like the original Zcash community member, and he was the original moderator of the
Mm-hmm.
forum. And he did a good job of moderating. You said you've done a lot of
Oh yeah.
moderating. I think that's incredibly hard job, and I really appreciate anyone who can do it well. So he
Yes.
did a
And
really good
and
job
on a
of
side
like
note of that,
making,
the
yeah,
later into my moderation career, as it were, I go, the more light touch I try to be on as many things as possible. But then
yeah,
also, the quicker I am to react on on the places I'm not light touch, and
uh huh,
also the more I try to lead with what we could say like non-binding action, the more I try
uh
to
huh,
steer conversations rather than ban people, for example.
yep, yeah.
So
That sounds like you are growing in wisdom with your years. It sounds like
I
to me. So
wish
to
I could
try to
grow a little
answer your
faster.
question
Yeah.
briefly, there was a whole complicated mess of different measures, or
Mm-hmm.
conversations about the dev fund. Ycash branching off was a huge factor.
Mm-hmm.
To me personally, I don't know how many other people cared about it, but I thought that was really significant. Um, there was a poll, or I guess you call it a poll, that was organized by the Zcash Foundation, because they have this group called the Zcash Community Advisory Panel, which is a group of voters. Like, it varies in size over the years, but it's like more than 100 voters. And then there was a poll on the Zcash Foundation's forum, and then ECC organized a coin-weighted poll too.
Okay.
And there were 14 different proposals for different variations, like just like have no debt fund, go to the strictly like unfunded model was one of the
The Wild
proposals.
West.
Yeah, and there was 13 other proposals for different variants of how to do debt funds, who would it go to, how much it would be, and all this stuff. And then fortunately, the sort of conversations and threads and all three of those metrics were largely in favor of one of the 14. And that's the one that got implemented.
Yeah.
So it was really complicated. Like you say, we've done it before as a community, so hopefully we can do it again, or find it easier, or learn from it, or whatever.
At least have a template of how.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that the coin-weighted voting is especially interesting because when you get to DAOs, like a lot of times it's, token holders who vote. And
Yeah.
we're trying to say who votes, like nodes vote, but then anyone can run a node, so it becomes easy to
Right.
Sybil. It seems like it's like the two main anti-Sybil mechanisms, right, are proof of work and proof of stake, or some hybrid in between them, right? Of proof of work, mining, it's you can't really spoof hash rate really, and stake,
Right.
you got the money or you don't. And those are
Yeah.
kind of like the baseline. So like the coin weighted voting is a really good way of saying, because if someone has a ton of ZEC, they're not going to want to destroy the value of their investment long term. At least they're trying to have better interests, but it is incomplete.
Skin in the game.
So I on the very first Zcash podcast, when I talked to Nate a long time ago, I kind of briefly posited like a theory, but again, I have no idea how to do this in practice. It would be nice if there was some kind of a vote weight mechanism that could be a combination of stake, as in like coin holding, and lifetime fee spend, which kind of says like how much have you actually used the thing. So for example, if I used Zcash so much, but I didn't have much money because I was a man of little means, but I'm like a daily user, my fees rack up a lot that I've spent. It's not just and that makes it not resistant to spam attacks, right?
That's a neat idea.
But that helps. So maybe I'd be on the same level as like an investor who has a big bag but never uses it. The problem is, how do you assign lifetime fee spends to people in an anonymous system?
It's probably possible with zero knowledge proofs, because anything is, but it sounds hard.
Yeah. That might be something for like, again, don't put it on ECC's plate, right? But maybe someone else could start thinking about how to do that, because there might be an aggregate economic score that someone could create for voting, and then you can kind of pull the community without just being stakeholders. The stakeholders better than nothing, but you kind of want community too.
Yeah, I agree. And ECC might help with that, because we're making our own wallet, right? And like it has a submit feedback button on it, so that we can find out, what experiences our users are having. And so I have this half-baked fantasy, no promises. I have this half-baked fantasy that whenever our users of the ECC wallet click the submit feedback button, it includes a zero knowledge proof of their like holdings and their history along with their feedback. That'd be really awesome.
Yeah. So I think that would be great. Maybe if you have a million different wallets, you could just all sign them together, and then all your aggregate history gets together. I don't know. Be interesting to figure out.
Complicated, but theoretically possible.
But so now we have a different thing to think about here, which is it's not just how do you decide who gets money or for what purpose. It's the should. And so there is something very interesting I've noticed with economics and incentives Whereas obviously you have projects like, say, a Bitcoin or a Monero or something like that that doesn't really have like the same kind of money, but it doesn't have built-in self-funding, right? And then you have other projects that, like Zcash that has a dev fund, like Dash that has a DAO, like I'm sure Tezos, like I mean, there's a million other ones. And it begs the question of the efficiency. And so I'm a free market guy, right? In my estimation, free market competition tends to produce the most efficient outcomes. And the big problem with something like Bitcoin was that there was no dev fund, no ability to self-fund. There's the miner fund, right? The block reward, but no dev fund.
Yeah.
And outside parties came in and captured, in my estimation, or influenced Bitcoin development. Or at least now there's I think 3 or 4 full-time Bitcoin core developers. It's like really low amount right now who are like full-time. And so, but on the other hand, when you have like a government or something, you have like a government grant, a lot of times that money doesn't go as far as maybe in a free market setting where we have those proper incentives. And I've sort of noticed this in my years observing and participating in the Dash ecosystem of people have the incentive to do what is required to acquire funding. But as far as the efficiency of where that goes after that, they seem to not feel that like pull quite as much. And so I'm wondering with like the dev fund, if there are insufficient or just there might just not be the right kind of incentives to make sure that money's spent efficiently, that it might be like there could have been much more successful marketing, much more successful this, make sure if there had been a more free market incentive there. But as far as how to establish that, I have no idea. What are your thoughts on that kind of idea?
I think I agree with you in principle. Like, there's nothing as good as competition in everything in human affairs. There's nothing that motivates people better and also teaches people better. You learn more from competitors than from almost anything else. So I'm highly in favor of competition. And the other part of what you said makes me think of, I was thinking, no, Joel, I disagree with you that dev fund recipients don't have like pressure to perform because they could get defunded. They want to get another grant later. They want the price of ZEC to go up instead of down, since their funds are denominated in ZEC instead of denominated in fiat. But then I was thinking, well, but I also agree with you that the feedback loop is really long, right? Like if you learn something and you get some like positive or negative reinforcement like every week, that's totally different than if you learn 12 or 50 times as much, or you get 50 times as much reinforcement, but it only happens once a year.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So I have seen a lot, like not just in Zcash at all, but throughout my career, I have seen quite a lot of like underperformance. Like, like 2/3 of everybody that you ever give money to is just going to turn out to be total muppets who just never do anything, or never do anything that actually anyone never uses for anything, you know? And it's kind of just like a fact of nature. Like if you're trying to use money effectively, you just got to prepare yourself that somewhere between 1/3 and 2/3 of it is probably going to be wasted, and you have to start developing processes to minimize that. What was my point? My point was I have seen that a lot, including with grants style programs. And in theory, I'm really in favor of competition and of short feedback loops.
Yeah, of course.
That's why I'm really excited about ECC's new focus about getting end users directly into our interactive feedback loop. Like, we didn't really talk very much. You asked me what is ECC not doing, and I started the list and didn't get anywhere near the end of the list of things that were offboarding to other parts of the Zcash ecosystem. But we didn't really talk about what ECC is doing. One of them is our own wallet. And the reason for that is this: to have a direct feedback loop, to learn from people quickly and repeatedly instead of like years later.
Yeah. Is there any way, I mean, obviously, because the more zero knowledge, the better, but also that makes gathering data sometimes challenging.
Yeah.
Is there any way for a wallet to figure out how much money is flown through there, or how much fees have been generated by users of that wallet, for example?
It's definitely possible theoretically. I haven't thought through the actual like complexities. Well, I have a little bit. One of the yeah, it's definitely possible.
Hmm. Yeah, so that's kind of an interesting thing. So let me hit this last of the canned questions, and we have some other ones here. Of it seems to a certain extent that Zcash, as well as most of my favorite projects, has the undervalued project curse. Whereas why is Zcash, an other quality project, attracted so much less capital than technically inferior projects over the years? Is it unavoidable? Or is it something we could fix? Or is it even a problem? Like, for example, maybe all the hype projects will crash and burn, but Zcash and others will be left standing at the end of things. Yeah, what do you think?
Those are really good questions. I often wonder about that. I like what you said about the hype part because, like, I've had this experience in crypto. Having been in crypto for long enough, I've multiple times had the experience of thinking, "Oh, such and such is such a strong competitor." Like they have all the buzz, like the venture capitalists are proclaiming their promise, and they have so many users and so much usage and so many features, and they're like a mobile first UX focused thing, and they have integration with Signal, for example. And they have all these features that I wish we could have, and so forth and so forth. And then, like 2 or 3 years later, I'm looking back and I'm thinking, whatever happened to those guys? Right?
Yeah.
Like, they've come and gone.
Mm-hmm.
So that reminds me of what you said at the end of that. Like maybe not having as many hype cycles is actually helps us like, stay steady or something.
Because a lot of times, maybe price performance is relative, right? I mean, obviously, there is absolute to it as well, but to another extent, it's just like, and again, this is just my like little finger to the wind, see which way it's blowing. I've noticed a lot of complaints with price over the years, a little bit in Zcash, more acutely in Dash, but also like other projects such as Library, which I really love, and I use, in fact, right, we're using Library right now by streaming on Odysee as well, right? Again,
cool.
Ranked 1100 something on CoinMarketCap, right? Just like in the complete dungeons of like no value, but practically useful with 10 million monthly visitors to the site that runs on it. It's not bad, right?
Fascinating.
But so this giant disconnect. I've noticed a lot of complaints. Some of it is, I wish I made more money on this investment.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is, and then some of it also is like, I wish we could do more with the technology if we had more money. And other bits of it are, I wish that we could get more users, but it's hard when the price does this. But one of the most common kind of vibes in the complaint, probably the biggest one, is we are doing so poorly compared to X.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the biggest thing that I notice a lot of people's, it's just like a sign of like being left behind. Like everyone else is, it's not the price is doing so badly. I mean, maybe I haven't looked at a long-term Zcash price chart, but like I'm sure the price could be better, but it's at the same time, it's not catastrophic. It's just when you start thinking about what you're able to do with it and competition. So, I mean, I don't know. Do some of these big projects come and crash and burn? Like, I don't know if Solana's going to be around in a few years, but IOTA still is centralized, last I heard, unless like that's another big one that kind of like vanished. But I don't know. How much do you think of this is like hype projects versus real projects? Just hype projects get more thing. How much do you believe that good projects just focus way too much on building product, but not enough on polishing it for end users and delivering it to end users? Like,
Those
What
are
do you,
good questions. But I don't know the answers to those questions. But what you said, trying to think back to a couple of things you said. One was, yeah, so there's this, I always think in whether a thing is a positive sum game or a zero sum game, right?
mm-hmm.
And there's this weird thing where crypto is both, because
Yes.
if you're a token buyer, like a token trader who's considering whether to buy or sell or hold different tokens, then everything is a zero sum game. Everything you invest in, you invest that much less in something else, right? That's the very definition of zero sum.
Mm-hmm.
But then, like you, Joel, if you're a user, pretty much everything is positive sum. Like every new
Mm-hmm.
technology that comes out gives you more capabilities to do more things with more other people.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Um, so it's a really weird disconnect where those two things are intermingled with each other. And something else you said was something that really resonated with me, what I've heard from different members of the Zcash community recently, which was they've said quite a lot. The coin price going down means we're doing something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, like that's a really good argument, right? Like there's a principle of the thing that if the bottom line core metric that can't be spoofed comes out negative, then you must have done something wrong. It was your job to make it positive one way or another. But then on the other hand, no, actually we could have done a lot of things right, and the coin price might still have gone down because of factors like completely external to anything we would have done.
Mm-hmm.
We as the Zcash community, I really don't know, but
Yeah.
it's a solid argument.
Yeah, and that's the thing that, because I've been trying to figure out like what equals adoption and what equals success, and it's really hard to determine. We kind of can see price and capital allocation, investment, that kind of stuff. We can see raw transaction counts, which for anything that's not a congested chain is not valuable data really, because it can
totally
be spoofed.
spoofable.
But one thing that I think is very hard to spoof, or relatively hard to spoof, is total fee spend. And if you look at that, there's a great site which I shill at every opportunity that I have no connection with whatsoever, called cryptofees.info. And not every crypto's on there, but on crypto fees, you see the actual revenue, if that is such a thing, of chains. And you get to see a very interesting picture. For example, you see that the flippening has already happened kind of to a certain extent, in that Ethereum, like the one-day fees for Ethereum is like 8.8 million, right? That's kind of what they're generating. Bitcoin's 2.4 million at this current heightened fee state. And then you go all the way down the list, and then when you start to get like Cardano's like 8,000 a day, Dogecoin's like 4,500 in an entire day of like fees generated. And then you start getting down to like Monero territory at 1,500 per day. And no major chain that's not a major smart contract chain seems to be generating enough users and money to be sufficient or anything like it.
Except for Bitcoin.
Yeah, and even Bitcoin, it's like a fraction of most days. It's only 1 or 2% of the entire block reward comes from fees, and so just now it's a few percent probably, just because there was a big congestion issue with which could have been the result of like a temporary. It could even be an attack. Some people are saying it's an attack, that some people were minting tokens as a way to stress the network on purpose, but it's just. So the fee and reward right now is 8.87% in Bitcoin. So most of it is still inflation or issuance. So that might be a good metric, but I guess the real thing is taking the product to market, right? And as you mentioned, Zcash is focused a lot on building stellar rails, as it were, as in the actual technology. The natural resource upon which everything is built is just, second to none in a lot of ways, right? That's just that the end user product that people use a lot tends to be, Bitcoin and Litecoin right now. And according to what people are paying on transactions out there. And so that's the disconnect, right? Maybe.
You suppose that's largely used for trading liquidity, like
It could
basically
be.
to move money from one CEX to another CEX? Back in the
Definitely.
day, that was like sort of one of the main use cases for coins.
Or even more now on dexes, because there's more dexes need on-chain activity as opposed to CXs, which is like it could all be on the internal ledgers. But you see that you also see in like Bitrefill is one of the best adoption
Yeah,
metric companies in the world, and
yeah, and I love the fact that they publish so much good data by Matt Alborg.
yeah, and then also
Sweet.
what is it? BitPay has some other good stuff, and so you see
Oh,
Bitcoin and Litecoin have a lot of BitPay and Bitrefill usage that we can
hmm.
tell. And I mean, I don't know, like I don't know if Flexa is a big enough player to have meaningful data, but they do
Hmm.
have a few coins going through there, and who knows how much, maybe they're disproportionately high on Zcash because it's one of the main ways you can spend Zec in the real world in the US at least.
I know people who buy their Chipotle with Zcash,
Yeah.
who are not like technologists. They're kind of normal, semi-normal
Mm-hmm.
people who buy
Yeah.
their Chipotle with Zcash.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess the big question is, how much of it do you think? We'll just like settle with opinions here at this point because we kind of
Okay.
explored it and we were like, I don't know. So,
Yeah.
how much of it do you
Data
think?
not present.
How much of it do you think is speculation? How much of it do you think is like hype that it's okay in future generations and future cycles it won't matter as much, versus how much you think is doing something wrong as far as executing in a way that is actually like real.
Uh, well, and also the third part is how much of it is positive, like
Mm-hmm.
the positive side of speculation.
Yeah.
Like I'm the one who brought us all down at the beginning by saying the price of Zec has been going down year after year.
Mm-hmm.
So that's totally true. It's totally stressful to my company and everyone else, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Things like it have been true for most or all other coins off and on during the years I've been involved in crypto. But on the other hand, um, Zec, the coin, is still paying for a whole bunch of really good work, right? It has paid for a whole bunch of really good work, like the 3 successive cryptographic breakthroughs that my team discovered and implemented and deployed, and that you use now on your phone.
Yeah.
Um, and a whole bunch else. Like, we didn't mention this during this conversation, I don't think, but
Mm-hmm.
only 1/3 of that dev fund is going to ECC. Maybe we did mention
Yeah.
that.
We
But there's
did.
like a whole bunch of other stuff that independent teams are doing for Zcash.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that is made possible by the Zec holders choosing to buy and hold Zec, right?
Mm.
So that's sort of like the positive perspective, like the glass is half full.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's something that Litecoin doesn't have,
Mm-hmm.
and it's something that Zec wouldn't have if the price crashed to a tenth of a cent, like library.
Yeah. I mean, I think library might be a penny right now, about a
Oh,
penny,
sorry.
but close to it. I
Apologies.
I haven't checked lately because I'm going down with the ship on that one, and they do have their issue with the SEC suing the ever loving what out of them, and I'm
Uh-huh.
friends with Jeremy, and it's been a very stressful, hard time. I mean,
Uh,
as I'm sure you can imagine, but uh,
so my point was,
mm-hmm.
my point was attributable like failures
Mm-hmm.
or errors versus random sort of like false narratives or speculative
Mm-hmm.
randomness or competition. I don't really know, but I also think glass is half full.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my general thought is I think that the price valuation of cryptos today is a mixture of real utilitarian use and speculation. And it seems like utilitarian use is the baseline, it's kind of like the price floor,
Okay.
whereas speculation is fluff on top. This is this is what this is worth aggregate today. And then this is what people might think it could be worth in the future. And then people speculate all kinds of things. Does coin have dog? That's one that's very often speculated on. But then also, where's the development heading? And then is this going to, there might be a certain, there's so much speculation on that, and that's all it is, right? So my kind of thought on these kinds of things is, I would say what you could call poor price performance or whatever, or not as good as what you'd think other actors might be, is probably a mixture of a just honest to goodness lack of hype, that's who cares at a certain point, and half of it is a lack of half of it is based on fundamentals, on some actual things that people are perceiving. Like, for example,
you're saying half and half. Okay.
Yes. So, for example, when I'm talking about let's just, the Litecoin comparison is a good one, I guess, because it's sort of in the same domain. It is, in my view, it's second to Bitcoin in economic usage for money purposes. It's hard to tell for sure, but as far as the data I've seen, it seems like that.
It's accepted a lot of places. There's a lot of volume on chain and on CEXs, or there was last time I checked.
Yeah, it seems like, first of all, is compared to Zcash, it's easy to get Litecoin, and it's easy to spend it or use it places. And those base utility things seem to really kind of work out. And also people, the brand recognition is really strong. And I think that does translate to utilitarian purpose, because if people have to spend extra time figuring out that Zcash even exists, that's extra user friction. And so that's, and in terms of actual transactions, I think that one of the reasons why Litecoin's up there is because it has a lot of transactions, relatively speaking. I mean, relative to a Visa or something, absolutely not. But in my view, I guess Zcash, obviously, some of it is just, it never was this coin does not have dog. Coin may have zebra, but not dog, right?
Zebras are kind of like dogs. Come on.
Yeah, the meme hasn't got on nearly as much. But so, obviously, going after different things, the space will be different. But Zcash does need a lot more users, I think. And I think everyone who's working on Zcash would always say more users, the more the merrier. And so, I guess there's that, and then there's, speculation on the ability of the teams involved to deliver valuable products in the future. And I think that the speculation, I would say that almost no one doubts, if, for example, ECC's ability to deliver the very best in privacy technology that's out there. I don't think anyone really doubts that at all.
Right.
I think that where there might be some doubt is in the ability to deliver. And again, we're talking about the mission split between ECC and the rest of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
But as a whole, again, people don't buy ECC coin; they buy the whole thing, right? And there might be some misgivings about the ability of Zcash as a whole to develop fantastic end user products and experiences, not like base technology, but as in the guy on the phone who spends the money paying his rent doing this or does that or whatever, and the ability to take those to market. And that's the bigger thing, the sales and marketing is can you get people to use this? Because there are a lot of good Bitcoin salespeople, right? You got Jack Mallers, who is I don't have many nice things to say about him, unfortunately, but one thing I can say is he's a fantastic salesperson. He sells his product really well. Sometimes dishonestly, in my opinion, but he sells very well. And I think that what would cause people to would cause some price recovery without giving the coin dog or other pumpamentals, right? Would probably
zebras.
Yeah, you could do some cute zebra things.
The Zcash marketing director, who thank God is no longer me.
Yeah, but so that
it's you now.
Well, I mean, in context of this podcast and the couple of videos that I make for ZecHub, yes. But as far as that, if people start to see that, there will be awesome end user products, including the ability to spend Zcash in a lot of places. And we also see that there's someone out there who's good at selling companies on adopting Zcash and selling users on doing it. And you start to see the transaction counts go up and companies start to post, because people, let's just say, at a like Flexa, for example, if they start to see those Zec transaction numbers start to creep up and up and up with like bigger volumes and everything, people at the company will start to buy, to speculate on Zec, for example, and it just goes from there. So I don't have any answers, but those are some ideas.
Well, that is something that it's one of the many things that the Zcash community should have a intentional conversation about, which is that ECC, that's one of the things I didn't name on the list of things that ECC has done and is now going to transition to a more decentralized way of doing it, or someone else doing it, and that is partnerships with end user apps, companies like the BitRefill and the BitPay that you named. There's lots of partnerships, all the exchanges outside the US that don't already list Zcash, for example. So that's something where I strongly recommend that the Zcash community think through the list and say to themselves, okay, is it okay to do without that? Like maybe it's a waste of money to try to court those people, or if it's worth doing, then who's going to do it? And how are we going to pay them? And how are we going to evaluate their performance? Because that is something that previously ECC did and we're stopping.
Yeah, so a new entity has to come out to do that.
Yeah, or one of the current entities, if they're good at it, if they can prove they're good at it, or a new entity, or a decentralized way of doing it. I don't know. So
what I would like, because one thing I've noticed about Zcash over the years, just like a random observation, which could be based on very incomplete or faulty data, but I'll throw it out there anyway. In the early days, you had a lot of like industry recognition for Zcash, and it kind of wasn't very fan heavy. Like you had fans and users here and there, but I didn't see as much. In the last maybe year or so, I've noticed, like, for example, people like I'm on Twitter, right? I tweet out the podcast. I see a lot of accounts that I've seen over and over again, like retweet and then comment and like get people into this podcast. I didn't see that change too. It seems like there's a community of people that maybe were passive in the past, and then now we're realizing, we have to do something. Otherwise, this freedom enabling technology that's second to none in this case is not going to make it to help as many people as otherwise could. So my thought on that, I would, which by the way, this is bully pulpit here to encourage people. If someone wants to start a Zcash organization, sort of like a ZecHub or something like that, or maybe ZecHub can do it, or maybe ZecHub could get more money or whatever. It would be nice to have a verifiable integration bounty system where you say you flip this, business, you get them to take Zcash, however you do it, and you get rewarded for that. As instead of a business development officer salary, it's just a per bounty kind of thing, which doesn't mean it's a replacement for anything like that, but it does mean it could be that little secret sauce to mobilize the community into doing that. Because I know from my personal perspective, right, I talk to lots of people. I talk to lots of businesses. I interview people on my show, et cetera, et cetera. And I have gone out of my way a few different times to talk to them about integrating Zcash. And sometimes my ability to prioritize those conversations gets pushed down the stack, the email stack, when there's all the things that are keeping, me able to pay my rent are up here. Oh yeah. And so I'll just say go through those, and then when I have some free time, I get to that conversation, or I push harder or whatever. And so I just know from my personal perspective, I would have more leeway to, harass businesses into specifically taking Zcash, even though I'm already including businesses that I'm already using as a customer, but because they take other cryptocurrencies, and I'm like, the urgency isn't quite as there for me because I'm already a happy customer, but I could be a happy Zcash customer. So that's just a thought to put out there to the community.
That's an interesting thought. I do think that businesses do tend to listen to actual
says,
customers.
Great idea. Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, I think the Zcash community should organize a conversation about this and many other related issues. But like make a list of all the things that we think Zcash needs, and mark whether anyone currently owns that thing, and prioritize which ones we need the most and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we did have a question from the super chat. Hilawe, he was a longtime supporter of and a fan of privacy, etc. He commented, he says, in Zooko's opinion, how has Zcash avoided the scrutiny of regulators while being optionally private and having a company behind the dev team as opposed to completely scattered to the winds? And his thoughts on the latest threats to U.S. exchanges like Bittrex and Coinbase.
I'll try to summarize. Oh, it's so complicated. The big picture items are that the U.S. exchanges all listed Zcash, starting with when Gemini, started with Kraken listing Zcash on day one. And that's just due to Jesse Powell, who was at that time the CEO of Kraken, being awesome. And then Gemini got approval from the New York Department of Financial Services to list Zcash. And then Gemini having done that, so here's this thing about competition again. There's nothing like competition to both motivate and teach. Gemini having done that opened Coinbase's eyes that it was possible, right? They were like, wait, Gemini did that? Well, why couldn't we do that? And so then Coinbase listed Zcash. Binance has always supported Zcash. And then when you look at the rest of the world, like it's a real mixed bag in terms of a lot of exchanges have like exit scammed in the last few years. A lot of exchanges are sort of hyper local to only one country and stuff like that. But there's a lot more exchanges that don't list Zcash in a lot more countries. So for starters, my answer is it wasn't that Zcash avoided the scrutiny of regulators. It was that we kind of got lucky by Jesse Powell and the Winklevoss brothers and Brian Armstrong and the board of directors of Coinbase all being privacy mission-oriented people and being willing to support it and put their shoulder behind it. And Binance also. And then we're not that lucky in a lot of places now. Anyway, I don't know if that answered your question. Your other question was, what was that question about there being a company behind it? I don't know. It's such a complicated field.
Just a regulatory thing. So it seems like it seems almost like the exchanges, because I've seen a lot of exchanges be very hesitant to list privacy coins over regulatory concerns. And it seems like the big ones seem to not have had any issue. The big ones seem to not have had any issue listing Zcash, despite it being what I would call the top of the privacy coin heap.
The big three in U.S. plus Binance.
Yeah.
Again, I'm saying that's because the founders and CEOs of those companies were OG crypto people who were in it for the mission. There was the fact that ECC flew to New York and visited with the New York Department of Financial Services many times and tried to pitch our vision. So A, we tried to teach them, like, how does encryption work? But B, we sat down with the New York Department of Financial Services and said, encryption protects the people whose job it is yours to protect. That didn't come out grammatically, but you know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Like, encryption protects Americans from enemies and from hackers and from like mega corporations exploiting them and all that. And so I think that that message actually resonated. And I remember the one time the New York Department of Financial Services, way back when Gemini was applying for permission to list Zcash, and they had to get approval from under the BIT license from the New York Department of Financial Services before they could. And the New York Department of Financial Services requested that my team fly back to New York and explain more stuff to them for like a third time. And we were like, what, like, didn't we already explain all the things? Why are they even calling us here?
They don't know.
It's like bureaucratic process. It's like
Yeah.
for pro forma, you know, it's like to make the right showing or whatever. But so I put on my suit, which thank goodness I don't have to wear anymore. And we flew to New York, and the whole like New York Department of Financial Services crypto division was lined up on the other side of this really big table. And then the most authoritative person from there in the room opened the meeting by like gesturing at all of his colleagues. And he said, "We all agree that we don't want our families and our citizens' pocketbooks being exposed to everyone on the internet." And I was like, wow, that's why we came here. They called us here just to say that, right? So that's my answer, which I think surprises a lot of people, because a lot of people have a simplistic or cynical view of government, which is that it's evil and oppressive and has no motive other than to stamp a boot upon a human face forever. And I don't exactly disagree with that perspective. But on the other hand, these guys from New York Department of Financial Services were persuaded. They didn't want their families getting into this crypto thing and being exposed to all kinds of random bad actors because they didn't have encryption, right? So it's like, it's really, really complicated. It's not simple at all.
Yeah. And so what about the SEC standpoint? Because people like to pretend government's a monolith, and it's kind of not. Principally, maybe it is, but in terms of practice, absolutely not. And the SEC seems to have targeted a lot of different crypto companies. It seems I would call this, like, maybe I would call the SEC personally as a bad actor today. Whereas other branches of government, I would maybe call a producer of bad outcomes, but not a bad actor, if you know what I mean, if you don't understand the difference.
Interesting.
The SEC is acting in a very destructive sort of a way. And especially in their way of going after companies for selling unregistered securities that they won't go after they won't go after the assets themselves as unregistered securities, but they'll go after the company for selling them at the same time as they won't give guidelines of what are securities and what aren't. And it's a very weird legislation by enforcement kind of an approach, but it seems like they seem to be targeting US-based cryptocurrency projects with some kind of a company and a team at the head of it that receives money from a block reward of some kind. There seems to be some kind of theme, what I've noticed with a few things, like Library, for example. And then they casually mentioned Dash in the Bittrex case. And it seems like Zcash would be prime in their crosshairs. Now, do you think Zcash has just not been affected because, well, it's coming at some point? Or do you think there's another reason? Or do you have any speculation? Because that's really all we got right now.
I mean, I have a lot of information, which is that we've never been targeted or subpoenaed or anything at ECC. I have an opinion, which is that the way we launched Zcash and the way the community came up with the dev fund, I don't think, how do I put this? Ian as a parent, okay, let me back up and take a flying run at this, okay?
Yeah, of course.
It's not just the SEC. The entire Biden executive branch is determined to drive all crypto out of the U.S. Not just privacy, not just securities or security things that smell like securities or whatever. They just want to stamp out and prevent anything that's not under their control in order to pave the way for something that's completely under their control, which is a USA CBDC.
So do you think, really quick on that, for a small point of clarification, do you think they're trying to deliberately chase out all crypto, or they're just trying to chase out everything that they can't control, and they know the crypto industry is not ready to submit to the kind of control that they want to have over it. Or because those
I don't understand the distinction.
Well, there's
what are you talking about?
There's not much of a distinction, but basically, have they decided they just want to get rid of all crypto, or they decided that they want to either make every crypto bow to their regulations, or else get rid of them?
No, they just want to get rid of it.
All right,
doesn't matter.
That makes sense. And
I don't have any particular inside information.
Yeah,
really,
it's just apparent
I
from
hear
the
a lot
outside.
of chatter from. I'll hear a lot of chatter from members of the industry and whatever, but also from like reading the Biden executive order and that other like report from the Office of Economic whatevers and so forth. It just sounds like to me that somebody in the Biden administration said, "Ooh, wouldn't it be great if we were more like communist China?" And the way to do that would be to start by driving crypto out of the U.S. I think that's what it boils down to. And it sounds dumb, but I think it is dumb.
Yeah, wow. That is interesting. And from what, I mean, obviously you're a secondhand recipient, but you receive probably more of these more directly than I would. Is it a Biden administration specific thing? Is it a Democratic Party kind of a thing? Do you think, like, beyond that? Do you think it's just like the powers that be tend to be kind of into that? Like, how specific do you think is the driving force of all this?
Those are good questions I don't know the answer to. I do know that administration, like, laws are forever. Like, we're still dealing with laws that were made like 100 years ago, but administration policies are transient. And I do know that the United States was designed, like, intentionally, deliberately designed as like a decentralized system, like a DAO with no single points of failure. And the executive branch is not the government.
Yeah,
there's two other branches of the government that are explicitly there for the one reason that if the executive branch fails to uphold the rights of the citizens, the other two can step in.
Yeah. Now, I would really like them to. I mean, I've seen Congress grilling Gensler and really making him look like he's in big trouble. But I also don't really know if anything's going to come from that, you know? That's the thing.
I don't know either. There is one more thing that I do know firsthand, which is that there's this really substantive conversation going on in Congress. And I know that because I just watched the video yesterday, literally yesterday. The ECC organized and hosted and spoke at one of a series of events. There's a podcast that we put on regularly, which you would probably find really interesting. It's really high quality stuff. It's called Pretty Good Policy. And we host a bunch of events and get-togethers. And yesterday was sort of our crowning achievement so far, which is that the event was actually in the Capitol building, which means you have to get some congressman or some congressman's office to let you in and let you invite people. And it was a packed room.
Or you just have to do it on January 6th. But that's a bad joke right there.
What a horrible joke. You should blip that out. And it was a packed room of the people. I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I think the room was all full of the people who work for the legislative branch, right? Whose job is to make laws or veto laws or whatever they do, or amend laws and so forth. And the topic was privacy in crypto. So it was very specific. It included Zcash. And it was, I thought it was pretty impressive that there's that many people whose full-time job is working for the legislative branch to make better laws, who wanted to spend an hour of their time talking about this with each other and hearing from Zcashers. You know, what's my point? My point is, this is one of the 4 things that ECC is still doing with our new narrower focus. There's a whole bunch of stuff like generating global demand. We're not going to do that. If Zcash wants to do that, we totally support helping them figure out how to do it, right? Getting listed or relisted or not delisted on all the exchanges in all the countries of the world. that could be really important, and somebody else should figure out how to do it. But there's one thing that we're still doing, which is having these teach-ins and these conversations with the legislative branch, especially, but also with anyone in Washington D.C. who has sincere interest.
Yeah, I mean that's a very kind of important thing, and I would, I guess, encourage as much as the crypto space that's able to be, I guess, non-anon to probably do the same thing. I mean, I've testified before the New Hampshire legislature before on like crypto bills and stuff, and I think a lot of it's kind of surprising how little people know as far as what is and what could happen and things like that. So.
Yeah, it's really interesting how much of the how far education can go.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and just simple things.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's kind of wrap this thing up. Let's take
all right.
One big, I guess, final kind of question of what's the biggest thing you're proud of in all your years at Zcash? What's the biggest kind of regret or misstep? Let's just throw that out there too. And then what's the biggest thing that you'd like to see other people, not yourself, because you got a narrow focus, right? Other people do for Zcash in the future.
Dang, that's hard.
Big ones.
I'm super proud of Zcash and of the team. Again, I didn't do almost all of the actual sort of science and technology and teaching senators and all the whatever, all the stuff is mostly due to my team. But I'm super proud of my team, and I really feel like we've made a mark in history by both someone Chris Goes from Anoma said this the other day, like on Twitter or something. It was like, if it weren't for Zcash, we wouldn't have the technology, nor would we have like the political philosophy of freedom that we have today in crypto. So I'm super proud of that, and I feel like it's something that no one can ever take back. You can't put the technology back in the bottle, and you can't unteach people that freedom is normal and desirable and possible.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to try to answer my biggest mistake. There's too many options. And what should people do?
Like, because you have to focus on what you're going to do. But what's one big thing you'd love to see someone do that won't be you?
You know, my current answer to this, and maybe this is just the particular context I'm in at this moment, it's actually, you know, the difference between like thrive versus survive strategy, right? Like make hay while the sun shines, or be like the cockroach. You should be hard to kill. And because of the Zcash price going down, a lot of the conversations among Zcashers are really negative and are all about like, what are we doing wrong? What have we done wrong? What do we need to do different? And I think that's really valid. Like, both the price going down could be evidence of failure and mistakes and bad strategy. And also, like, if the price is currently going down, then you should do something different and so forth. But on the other hand, I almost think at the same time, I don't know, maybe it's not true. Like, when you just said to me, Joel, what do I wish someone other than me would do? My immediate thought was just get like a high quality, committed team whose job is just to protect and maintain Zcash. We're talking like security hardening, like tech support for exchanges, like
SDK development, maybe. I don't know.
Well, we're going to do that for the wallet.
Yeah.
But it would be great if someone else would also do things redundantly, so we'd have more competition. But I have a strong feeling like Zcash, this is, maybe it's just me, I could be totally wrong, but I have this strong feeling like Zcash is so strong. Like, people don't realize it's so hard to kill. Like, I'm worried about loss of future improvements. Like, if the dev fund goes away and doesn't get replaced, then we'll be like Litecoin, where we improve slowly or not, or don't improve at all. But I'm just not worried about Zcash. Like, it can't be censored. It can't be sanctioned by OFAC. It wouldn't It can.
Which address are you gonna?
It can't be
send?
traced. It can't. Like it's so resilient and so super powerful that people who use it on their phones have this like power in their hand that they can see how nothing about them appears on any block explorer. So anyway, my point is, I kind of wish there was just a body out there whose promise to the Zcash community is, we're just going to make sure this doesn't regress, like it doesn't fall over.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be doing security monitoring and whatever. I don't know.
Yeah,
Like cockroach strategy.
A cockroach team.
Yeah, so, Team Cockroach, the new Zcash official mascot.
Yeah, Zockroach.
A zebra-striped cockroach.
Yeah, Team Zockroach. That'd be interesting. All right, that's it. That's a good time to wrap this thing up. Let's shill-o'clock right now. What do you want to shill? Where can people follow you, find what you do, all that kind of stuff?
I read and write on Twitter all day long. I recently started using Blue Sky. That's pretty awesome. You can hit me up on Twitter for a Blue Sky invite.
Oh, interesting. I might have to do that.
My Twitter handle is ZOOKO.
Mm-hmm. That's a very prized one. You know, just like, where's Zooko? Zooko, there, that's where he is. All right, well, fantastic. Thanks everyone for tuning in. This has been the Zcash Podcast. It's been quite a good one, if I may say so myself.
Thanks for the hardball, Boston Zcash.
Hey, yeah, of course. Well, I mean, this entire thing, you know, has been a lot of hardballs, but softer, with a lot of padding on the outside, at least for me. I'm a little less constrained by the limits of just a little comment on Odysee, right? But anyway, it's been a lot of hard kind of topics today. A lot of optimism though at the end of it, I think. And
yeah,
next month we should have, speaking of like practical use, we should have the life of Jacob on, the fellow who runs around spending it and stuff, and to talk about how exactly to use Zcash as real money in the real world at the present moment. So that's going to be a good one. Tune in to everyone next month. Thanks for watching. Everyone go follow at Zooko and hit him up for the Blue Sky invite.
Yeah. Blue Sky invites and tell me your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys. Peace out. Have a good one.
Thanks,
Stay positive. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye.